we naturally produce this hormone, GLP-1, but because over time it changes and it's not as responsive, many people start to lose their natural activity of GLP-1. So GLP-1 medications are essentially trying to mimic that hormone.
What are some of the foods that we can eat that can encourage this production naturally?
Some of the foods that help you naturally produce GLP-1 include things that have a lot of protein in it. So we're talking about eggs, we're talking about lean meats, even dairy. These are foods that help with producing GLP-1s. The second piece is looking at foods with a lot of fiber. I've gone from, this is scary, I don't like these medications, I don't want to prescribe these medications, I want nothing to do with them, to like, wait a minute, if we microdose, we're actually seeing some benefits.
Dr. Tasneem Bhatia, better known as Dr. Taz, is a board-certified physician specializing in integrative and emergency medicine, pediatrics, and prevention with expertise in women's health, weight loss, and nutrition. She's the author of several best-selling books, including The Hormone Shift and The 21-Day Belly Fix. You being a practitioner and working with patients every day and seeing this huge wave of GLP-1 drugs hitting the market.
Yes.
And the response, it's been different depending on people's perspective. But one of the things that's overlooked, I think, is that this is just kind of hitting one note of what the human body can do, right? So this is just one of the many satiety hormones we have. You know, we've got CCK, we've got peptide YY, we've got obviously
so
leptin,
right.
adiponectin, the list goes on. And we'll talk more about this as we go on. But GLP-1s do a specific job, and they do it very well. Can you talk about, first and foremost, what GLP-1 actually does?
Absolutely. So first of all, we have GLP-1s, right? That's a natural hormone, and it's involved in appetite regulation, and it specifically is involved in bringing blood sugar levels down. So we eat a meal, we want insulin to be secreted. It helps us to lower the amount of sugar floating around in our bloodstream. That prevents us from gaining weight or having a lot of issues with stored belly fat and things like that. But at some point, for so many people, that wiring or that system or feedback goes off, and we can talk about that too in just a second. So we naturally produce this hormone, GLP-1, but because over time it changes and it's not as responsive, many people start to lose their natural activity of GLP-1. So GLP-1 medications are essentially trying to mimic that hormone. Now, some of the medications are not just, they have GLP-1, but then there's a second hormone involved too, which we can get into when we talk about all the different medication types that are out there. But they're paired with the GLP-1 hormone and another hormone called GIP, which is also involved in blood sugar regulation and movement of food through the intestine. So that's kind of like the short version of what a GLP-1 is, but essentially it's a gut hormone. It's the simplest way to remember it. And there are many other gut hormones, but it is one of the predominant gut hormones involved in this whole conversation around blood sugar and insulin and belly fat and weight and so much more.
Yes. Oh, I love this. Okay. Yeah. So GLP-1 has multiple roles. Primary one being helping with blood sugar.
Correct.
But also slowing down the digestion of food.
Definitely.
But also pairing it with this other one, the GIP.
Yeah.
This one is going to slow things down, I believe, a little bit more. So that combination. And so what we already know is coming down the pipeline is going to be combinations of these different peptides and different chemical complexes to address the different satiety hormones, to address what's going on with the gut, the digestion of food.
Right.
And also, and this is the other big point, it's communicating with your brain.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because there's this gut-brain information superhighway, and a lot of our desires and our satiety, we don't necessarily feel it like, oh, my stomach's empty. It's a head thing.
Well, it's all interconnected, and you and I have talked about that, so many times. But I think it's really interesting. If you look at the history of weight loss, let's just go back for a second. I don't know if you remember the stimulant drugs, right? Like the fen-phens and the phentermines and those type of drugs. Ephedra is another one, right? And it's interesting with the GLP-1s because we're kind of seeing the same thing, even though this class of medication is very different. But phentermine and that entire class of drugs actually did work more on your brain than it worked on your gut. And the thought was like, oh, if we can, cut hunger down and cut cravings down, people would lose weight. And they did. But the minute they stopped that medication, all those sort of like dopamine, serotonin, neurotransmitters, all of those things that were out of balance, it happened right away again. Now we have the GLP-1s that don't act on the central nervous system. They're actually acting on the gut. So the school of thought was like, okay, we're going to act on the gut now, and it's going to take away the cravings and all these different things that happen. But again, when we start to chop up the body and divide it into all these different little pieces, like you've got your head walking around over here, your gut's going over here, your heart's over there in the corner, it is a short win. And it will always be a short win because we know the gut and brain are connected. We know that gut and inflammation are connected. We know the gut, liver, and brain are connected. We know they all work together, and they work together in a number of different ways. They work together because the microbiome, that sea of bacteria that live in the gut, are influencing what's happening in the brain. We also know the microbiome is responsible and plays a central role in the production of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. I think like up to 80-90% of your dopamine and serotonin is actually made in your gut, not made in your brain, but your brain is influenced by that and is going to make decisions based off that, right? We know that the microbiome is influencing your hormones, and your hormones are influencing your brain, right? If you lose estrogen or progesterone or testosterone, we know that the brain completely changes. So again, I think the fallacy, whether we go back to fen-phen and ephedra and phentermine, or we go into these GLP-1 medications, is that these guys aren't talking to each other. And what we understand about the body and about health, and what I'm so passionate about with this holistic approach to health, is that we've got to remember it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And if we don't really start to spend the time and the energy understanding those connections, we're going to continue to have short wins and short gains, and we're going to keep coming back to the same starting point over and over again.
Yeah, that's so well said. For a lot of people, the average person, especially watching commercials today, they're going to think that GLP-1 is something exogenous, like this is a new thing.
Right.
But the truth is, this is just something that we discovered that the human body does, a little bit more recently. And like I said, there's a cascade of different satiety-related, metabolic-related hormones, neurotransmitters, all this stuff. And I want to talk about something you said earlier, which is so profound that we don't think about, which is this is something that our bodies do.
Right.
We make GLP-1, we make adiponectin, we make leptin. We also make other stuff that makes us hungry, like ghrelin, for example. And
I love that you know your hormones. This is amazing.
Listen, we got some stuff to say coming up here. But, you mentioned how this experience, this feedback, this interconnection, this communication in the body can degrade over time. Mm-hmm. And with this being said, the question is why? Why is this degrading so rapidly in our culture now?
Yeah.
Because if you look at certain cultures sprinkled throughout the globe still, they don't run into these metabolic challenges as people are getting into more advanced age. And it's extremely rare. And so my question is, what is it about our lifestyle that's gumming up this connectivity, this communication with our hormones, with the production of our hormones, with that feedback? Because it's not just the hormones, it's the receptor sites and all this different stuff. So what is making us more susceptible to degradation, especially degradation long before our time?
How much time do we have? So one thing to understand is that, unfortunately, this used to be a conversation just about over 40, over 50, over 60, right? Advanced age, middle age. It's actually a conversation about our children as well. And there are actually GLP-1 medications out there targeting kids, and pediatricians are prescribing them because children are losing their natural GLP-1 activity also. So why are we losing this activity, which we should be having, which should be working well into our 60s or so, maybe even into our 70s? And this is where we have to pull back and, think through all the different variables. And there's some that are actionable and that we can make a change right away. And there's some that might need a little bit more work and a little bit more thought. I think universally, we have to all agree that the primary trigger of this occurred and happened when we changed how we grow our food, source our food, prepare our food, and eat our food. And so and I think we can tie it all the way back. It was interesting. I was watching some documentaries on, the industrial, revolution, and when cereal first came out and when frozen vegetables first came out and all these different things. And you can kind of put a timestamp, of about 50 years after that is where we really started to see changes in blood sugar and insulin regulation and the manifestations of that. So food quality, I would say, is number one. But food quality is, yes, the food you choose to eat on a day in and day out basis. But I think people are pretty fatigued about hearing about that. But it's also, even when we're trying to be organic and clean and healthy and all these other things, at least 80% of the time, because everybody's human, just the basic quality of what our food has, the nutrients, the microbial content of the food, because the soil is now depleted. There's so many factors. We have, glyphosate and even the most, even in the cleanest foods nowadays, even in organic foods, there's cross-contamination. So we're looking at the byproduct of now over 100, 150 years, actually longer, right? Almost 200 years of industrialization of food and of big food, and our understanding that that has been a primary player in what's happened to everybody's microbiome, and what's happened to their gut health, what's happened to the gut-brain connection, hormones, and so much more. So that's one. Kind of hooked up into that is a similar idea of the toxic load, right? And that too has steadily increased over the last 100 years or so, until today we, are really being forced to understand and reckon with the fact that it is impacting what our body's doing with appetite, with the microbiome again, with inflammation, with so much more. So that's probably a second really big factor. I think the third, modern day, maybe in the last 20, 30 years, is our electronic exposure. And there's so many, anecdotal studies about this, but I think you're going to see that come out more and more as a factor that is playing into disruption of sort of GLP-1 regulation, our loss of it, and more. I mean, I can tell just a quick personal story. I spend a ton of time in front of the computer, whether it's writing or charting or thinking or whatever it is. And I noticed that, on some of those computer days when I'm not up and active and seeing patients, over and over again, I would get snacky is probably the best way to describe it. I want salt, I want something crunchy. I started wearing blue light glasses and put a blue light blocker over my computer. All of that went away. Yeah. So there's something about light and the wavelength of light that's impacting our hormones, starting with the pineal gland and then going all the way down to our gut and our brain and so much more. And then I think the fourth, and I'm trying to limit myself here, but I think the fourth big bucket is always the elephant in the room, and a word that I feel like is just overplayed a little bit. But stress and cortisol definitely influence a lot of the degradation of our hormones. And cortisol is relative, and it's really a reflection of different things. So for some people, another really fascinating study I looked at recently was that nowadays embryos in utero are exposed to more cortisol than before, leading to a lot of what I see in practice, more and more PCOS or androgenization, right, of our girls, or estrogenization of our boys. But a lot of that's happening right at, conception or in utero, because cortisol levels are high across the board. So this idea of where is this coming from? Is it again, people aren't sleeping, they're super stressed. We have a modern age where we can stay up 24 hours a day. We're always connected. Is it generational trauma? Is it immediate trauma? All these ideas are wrapped up into cortisol and our body's inability to truly rest, reboot, and reset the hormone axis. So to me, those are your four really big buckets of why this is happening and what's taken place, and why we're just seeing an epidemic, across the board and across ages when it comes to metabolic health, obesity, and all the other sort of sidebars of those two major diagnoses.
Yeah, thank you. I had no idea you were going to hit those last two, but this is so important today.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people don't think about it because it's normalized.
Right.
We're just in it. We have this relationship with technology now that it's new. It's new for us. It's only been a couple of decades.
We don't know the fallout.
We don't even know.
We don't know yet.
We don't even know. We've got plenty of data.
Yeah.
And just to go back, it's really affirming GLP-1 which is the focus right now, it's not operating in a vacuum. There's all of this other incredible hormonal chemistry taking place. And cortisol is going to be playing a part here.
Totally.
There's going to be an interaction. There's going to be an interaction with serotonin, with adrenaline. The list goes on and on. And being on our devices, we know, as you mentioned, it's the light. And what it's doing, this goes back to a huge point for us, which is it's the circadian rhythm.
Yes.
This is one of the primary, when we eat and our light exposure is controlling the expression and release of pretty much all of our hormones. They're happening on the circadian clock. Now, of course, there's stuff we can do at different times. If we lift some weights, we're going to change what our hormones are doing. If we, if we take a nap or whatever the case might be, if we get really stressed. But for the most part, your body's always looking to sync up with the 24-hour solar day. Mm-hmm. It's always looking to sync up with life. And so even with GLP-1 and other satiety-related hormones, our bodies have a propensity to produce certain things when we've evolved to be eating at these times, right? And so what if our body's clock is thrown off and we're literally up eating late?
Right.
Chances are things are not going to work the same way that they do if you're eating at different times and if you have a healthy light hygiene.
Well, I mean, your light is, I think the future is light, by the way. I think we're going to understand more about light and light frequency and what that's doing. And there might even be light therapies. I know some are already out there, but I think we may get more advanced with that because it is influencing us at many different levels. And, I would be excited if we start to, be able to say, okay, your light frequency is here. Here's what we need to do about it. It's impacting you in all of these ways. This is actually the starting point.
Mm. So whether it's light or whether it's other inputs, it's understanding, this is a big takeaway for everybody today, which is GLP-1 or any of our other satiety-related hormones, they're responding to certain things.
Right.
Right? It's responding to a signal. And so if everything is working well and efficiently, and we're eating maybe certain foods, avoiding other foods, your body's going to be producing GLP-1, for example, in response to a certain signal, right? And so this leads into the conversation of what are some of the signals that we can give ourselves so that we can start to healthfully produce GLP-1. But it's not just the production of it. It's not just the injection of it. It's also your body's responsiveness to the thing as well. But we're just going to focus on what are some of the foods that we can eat that can encourage this production naturally.
I mean, I think that's the good news, right? Like we talk about all the change that's taken place over the years. We talk about kind of the situation we're in environmentally or ecologically and all these different things. But the good news is that there are actionable things to do. And food is a big part of that conversation, right? Some of the foods that help you naturally produce GLP-1 include things that have a lot of protein in it. So we're talking about eggs, we're talking about lean meats, even dairy, if you can tolerate dairy. These are foods that help with producing GLP-1s. The second piece is looking at foods with a lot of fiber. And so fiber helps with GLP-1 production because fiber does exactly that. It slows down how quickly things are moving through your gut and through your intestinal tract to help you absorb the nutrients a little bit better and steady your blood sugar rather than experiencing these super highs and lows that blood sugar will go through when you're eating, more processed foods or foods without protein or foods without fiber. So we know, high fiber fruits and vegetables, we know lentils, all the bean family, seeds. These are all things that will naturally help you to produce GLP-1 without a medication. And they work. So many people will put their heads down and put a lot of energy into, am I getting the right amount of protein and the right amount of fiber in a given day? Am I spacing that out throughout the day appropriately? Because again, I know we've sort of gone up and down with the trends around fasting and, all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, what the body really needs, how we evolved, was to eat in very clear intervals, not to snack and graze all day so blood sugar is going up and down, up and down, up and down, but to have a clear time to eat, a clear time to digest, and then to do that all over again, So I think, those are some of the behaviors we can put into place and some of the choices we can make around food that you'll see a difference right away. I mean, just adapting and looking at your food and being like, am I getting the right amount of fiber? Am I getting the right amount of, protein can help you to naturally produce GLP-1s. And I would say this really applies, again, across the ages. I meet seniors who start to lose their appetite just on their own, but they don't get the protein, they don't get the fiber they need. So what happens? They end up having a lot of stored fat or belly fat. They're skinny fat and low muscle because they are just not hungry and don't want to eat that. Then we look at the other end of the spectrum. We look at our children, right? Whether it's our toddlers and our preschoolers and our high schoolers and all of them, and their diet is not high in protein and it's not high in fiber across the board. So they're experiencing some of the same fallout that comes with reduction in GLP-1. And they're medicating that over and over again by reaching for more sugar to get that blood sugar back where it needs to be, more processed food. So they ride that high and low and it looks different on them. They're experiencing more of the sensory issues and the focus issues and the cognitive issues. And now we're seeing younger and younger incidences of autoimmune disease and cancer and all the other diseases, and then there's the rest of us. And, it might be changes in our weight, changes in our mood, changes in our hormone levels, but there's so many different ways that plays out. So simply starting with, am I eating consistently? Am I eating about every 4 hours or so? Do I have enough of a fasting window around 12 hours that allows food to digest? Am I getting protein and fiber at every one of those intervals? And choosing these high GLP-1 foods, if that's what we want to call them, right? The protein coming from eggs and meat and even, a good source of dairy, if you can tolerate dairy, beans and lentils and seeds and stuff like that. And then fiber also coming from beans and lentils and seeds, but high fiber fruits and vegetables. That's a recipe for starting this journey, even before you think about a medication.
Yeah. One of the foods, your team sent me over a video and you were talking about a food that checks a lot of these boxes.
Yeah.
You're talking about avocados.
Oh, yes. That's a great one. You've got the fiber, you have healthy fat. That's going to help us with the GLP-1 conversation.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing you didn't know. And so we're going to collab on this.
Okay.
2019, I wrote my book, Eat Smarter. And it came out in 2020. And I'm grateful, it's a national bestseller, all the things. But in it, I talked about GLP-1. 2019, and this...
You were ahead of the curve.
I'm not clairvoyant, I don't think.
You were ahead.
I didn't know that this would be such a big part of our culture. And of course, I talked about GLP-1. I talked about CCK. I talked about peptide YY, adiponectin. The list goes on. And directing people towards, there's this other thing. It's not just leptin, which is what I was taught in school.
Right.
In my conventional university, we did hear about leptin and ghrelin, which was cool. But there's so much more because we like to look at this hormone does this does that. End of story.
Right.
And so one of the foods that I talked about, and this is directly from the book, was the wonderful avocado. And this was published in the journal Nutrients. And they had study participants to replace some of their dietary carbohydrates with some avocado instead. And after analyzing their biomarkers, the scientists found that calorie for calorie, adding in some avocado improved their blood sugar levels, increased levels of satiety hormones, PYY, and GLP-1.
There you go.
And overall, higher levels of subjective satisfaction and reduced hunger for longer periods of time.
Ding, ding, ding. I mean, I'm not surprised. And, we could talk about avocados for a bit too, but avocados, not just the fiber, it's the healthy fats, but all of that is helping with bile salts. And a big part of the gut equation, right, is making sure you're producing bile, you're emulsifying bile. Bile is produced from the gallbladder. We need it to regulate the very same hormones you're talking about. And when we went to a calorie in, calorie out mentality and thinking that every calorie was equal, right, and quality did not matter, that's also where we got into a lot of trouble, because as your study shows, something like avocado, which everybody thinks is fattening or highly caloric, is actually helping with the whole blood sugar hunger equation. And it's doing so at multiple levels: fiber, fat, bile salts, all of it.
Yeah. And I remember, in school, in my nutritional science class, and, the saturated fat paradigm was super sketchy at the time.
Yep.
And this fruit, which avocado is a fruit, had all this saturated fat as well, comparatively to other stuff.
Right.
And I was just like, this is not good for you. And people eating guacamole out
Yep.
here. And just, if you think about just a healthy, fresh made guacamole, it's got a couple of, some onions and garlic and tomatoes, whatever the case might be, some spices, a little salt, some lime juice or lemon juice. And none of that is like throwing off a red flag. And I think that it's probably more so related to what we do with the guacamole.
Right. Well, the chips that go with it, right?
Yeah.
That
so
might be the
down
story.
A bag of, the Doritos or whatever, we want to get freaky instead of just the regular tortilla chips. You can go, with some pizzazz on the chips. But it's that part. And also, I think it's the education around it. And for me, growing up in an environment where it's like certain foods, like we just didn't eat. Like I literally never saw an avocado until I was an adult. I never saw it.
I believe you.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the first thing when I saw guacamole, I'm just like, where the hell did that even come from? That just looks gross. But now it's like one of my favorite things.
I mean, there are areas of the country, and I've been in them for different things. There's not a lot of option in the fruit or vegetable aisle. There's some basic fruits and some basic vegetables. So there truly are this idea of food deserts that's real. And then in other areas of the world, they experience that in a different way. And while they may have access to some of those foods, the processed foods are actually cheaper, Oh, yeah. So people are making decisions based on their wallet. They're making decisions based on culture and what they learned. I don't think we've talked about this before. I have teenagers, and I think even with them, they're still in the calorie in, calorie out mentality, thinking that that's quote unquote healthy, So I still think we have a lot of work to do in terms of educating everybody on really what a good choice is, what does it look like, and then how to navigate the community and the culture that we all live in.
This reminds me of, a little bit later on, after getting myself healthier, I started to see more of the options around. I had to be creative.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of the power of demand. Mm-hmm. Right?
That's a good one, yeah.
And once the public awareness went up for certain things, I remember there was suddenly an organic aisle at the grocery store that had all these curated organic foods. Not necessarily that they're super healthy or better, it's organic Pop-Tarts or something like that. But then there was also more organic produce and things like that as well. But it's just because of the awareness went up, the demand went up. Yep. So the grocery stores and food manufacturers, they start to change what they're doing as well.
Which is great. I think it's amazing. I've been in this 15, 20 years and, I've been kind of witness to the change, right? It's been incredible to see organic become normal. Many of these ideas start to become, something that everybody's seeking. I think though, again, at a policy level, at a higher level, there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, of course. And we've got to think about what those foods are signaling, right? So we're talking about today a satiety hormone or collection of satiety hormones with GLP-1, but what is it signaling for what we're going to discover more hunger-related hormones as well when you're eating, a Pop-Tart, or you're eating some Doritos, or you're eating or drinking, Pepsi or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
What kind of chemistry, what signals is that sending your hormones and your neurotransmitters and your cells to react to?
Well, there's so much going on there, right? Like you're riding the highs and lows of blood sugar with many of these foods, the organic Pop-Tarts or the cereals or the processed foods, the fast foods. Basically, you're riding the highs and lows. So you're not there's so many studies that show there's a lack of satisfaction. You don't feel full or satisfied, right? And I think the other side of that is that blood sugar goes up, blood sugar comes crashing back down. And it does so very quickly rather than a nice steady state. And in that high and quick low, again, you kind of feel bad. So again, you're searching for something to medicate with. And so you reach for it again, So the chemistry that's involved with foods that don't naturally produce GLP-1 is really centered around high circulating blood sugar levels in the blood, right? And not being able to produce the insulin to take up that blood sugar and move it so that we just kind of feel nice and even. And with those highs and lows of blood sugar, you have changes again in dopamine levels, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter, right? So it's almost like you're getting a dopamine hit when the sugar's getting to the right place, and then you're down again, and then you need another hit, So we have become addicted to foods that, don't naturally produce GLP-1 at a steady state. That's really what we're at, or in a sweet spot. That's the other word I like to use a lot. So we've got dopamine involved. We have serotonin, the anxiety epidemic, right? Some anxiety is blood sugar. I find that over and over again in practice, that it's the highs and lows of blood sugar that are actually triggering anxiety rather than anxiety necessarily being a standalone. And that ties us back to serotonin. And then we've got like the whole hormonal fallout, right? We've talked about hormones before, but there's a whole hormonal piece to this. When blood sugar is going up and down, we have more stored estrogen. We gradually see testosterone dropping. We see changes in progesterone levels. We see changes in thyroid. So again, this thing, has massive consequences when we think about body chemistry and how it's playing together.
Yeah. What you shared, it's so simple, but it's so powerful. You mentioned this protein signaling for getting in adequate amounts of protein. And you mentioned fiber, and this cannot be overstated, and we've got really great data on this. Actually, just now I was looking at this, a certain type of prebiotic fiber called inulin.
Yes. Love inulin.
Fascinating study. This was published in the journal Gut. And inulin-derived propionate was found to significantly increase the release of GLP-1. Are you kidding me? And guess what a great source of this inulin is? Asparagus.
Yes. Oh, I love asparagus. So that takes us into another aspect of this. So naturally producing GLP-1 is a lot about the gut bacteria. And one of the gut bacteria that has been found to be deficient and seems to improve production of GLP-1 is something called Akkermansia. So we're seeing a lot of supplementation of Akkermansia right now. And the reason Akkermansia is helpful is it secretes a protein that rehabs the gut lining, which then allows better production of GLP-1. This idea of the gut lining, right, that takes you all the way back to the earliest conversations around leaky gut, malabsorption, whatever you want to call it. But that gut lining has to be intact. And unfortunately, the other modern day sort of gift is that for the majority of people, between stress, between food quality, even between pharmaceutical medications, right, that gut lining is getting destroyed. So that's another factor that's taking down our GLP-1. So the other thing we were thinking about with food, protein, yes, fiber, yes, but what's going to give us more microbial diversity? What can naturally increase something like Akkermansia or the other bacteria that are involved in this equation, like lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, and more? And that's where in 2014, it seems like forever ago, I wrote a book, The 21-Day Belly Fix, and we talked a lot about the importance of the gut and the gut microbiome. And one of the ways to increase something like Akkermansia or lactobacillus or bifidobacteria ties you definitely back to protein and fiber, but also encourages a lot of fermented foods in the diet. So taking in things like, kefir or bone broth, or eating sourdough bread over a regular bread, but really fermented sourdough bread, not something sitting on the grocery store shelf. I had a question on social the other day about pickles and pickle juice. Well, that's fermented too, So some of these fermented products are providing some of this bacteria that's necessary for adequate production of GLP-1. So after, I always say you graduate, first you kind of get the protein part down, like, okay, am I getting the protein? Are my numbers right? Am I getting the intervals right? Then you start looking at fiber critically. And quite honestly, nobody's getting enough fiber. I have, men and women coming in every day, like, I eat all these salads. Salads are actually very low fiber unless you're consciously trying to add the right fruits and vegetables to it, right? Better choice than maybe pasta or bread, but still not getting the fiber that's needed today to help you metabolize and to produce GLP-1. And so once you kind of graduate from that, then moving on and, hey, am I getting at least maybe 3 to 5 servings of fermented foods in my diet every day? That's kind of the next level of diving into food so that you can manage those bacteria that are involved in GLP-1 signaling. Super important.
So good. So simple. All right. So if people are looking for what are some foods that are backed by science, that can support my body's natural production of GLP-1 and other, again, it's not just hitting one note.
Right.
So other satiety-related hormones.
Right.
Avocado. We mentioned avocados. Yep. We checked off asparagus. Now the next one is fermented foods.
Fermented foods.
Which is a broad category.
Yeah.
Tons of different options here within this. You mentioned pickles,
sourdough
kefir,
bread.
Sourdough bread.
Yep.
Kimchi.
Kimchi's a good one.
Kimchi
Sauerkraut
is popping out
another
here.
one.
All right, it's popping out here. You know what's interesting? That, I didn't realize this until years after working at a university.
Yeah.
But while I was working at my university that I graduated from, I got to work with people from all over the world.
Yeah.
And eventually learning about fermented foods, which I didn't mess with any of that stuff as a kid. My mom would eat sauerkraut. I just thought she was super weird.
Right.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
But I started to ask people about, do they have fermented foods? And not a single person who was connected to their culture from where, the country they came from, every culture
has something.
Cultured
they
foods.
Have something, yeah.
Right? Why is it called cultured foods?
I love that, yeah.
So, yeah, and like whether it's Ethiopia, whether it's Iceland, whether it was,
India, they make
Japan.
paneer. My mom used to make her own yogurt. Like, all of that is cultured food.
Our ancestors figured something out.
They did.
For us. And we're just like,
right.
I'm good.
Yeah.
And, I want to ask you about this because if people are hearing this and like, I'm not eating no damn kimchi, some fermented foods do they have a bite to them, right? So what are some ways we can incorporate some more fermented foods into our diet?
I mean, there's so many, first of all, yogurt is a fermented food, so a high quality yogurt is something you can do if you're not ready to go the kimchi route. And, there's so many different ways to do it. I think, learning first about just choosing the right fruits and vegetables, and you can actually ferment your own foods too. I mean, you can literally take your favorite vegetable, you can add a little bit of apple cider vinegar and a little bit of olive oil to it, put it together, let it sit for a day. That's a fermented food. You're indirectly producing bacteria that's beneficial. Now, you probably don't want to let that sit for more than a day or two at the most, but that's one way of tackling that. Bone broth is one that a lot of people like. It's simple, easy to digest, right? So a lot of people will choose that as their source of fermented foods. But I think, again, the idea around this is just food variety, food quality in the toolbox of fermented foods. Just pick one or two that you like. And you've mentioned a bunch, and there are more. Like there's paneer, that's a big Indian concept. There's halloumi, that's in the Middle East. That's actually fermented as well. We've talked about sauerkraut a couple of times. Russians have certain different drinks too, but there's so many. So I think pick one and just kind of play with it and see if you can get acclimated to it over time.
I love that. So an easy on-ramp, especially in our culture, is the yogurt route.
I think yogurt and bone broth. I feel like those are the two easiest.
But what about, is there any yogurt do's and don'ts?
There's always yogurt do's and don'ts. So
Can I get some Go-Gurt?
No Go-Gurts, no yogurt with, all this added sugar and all this added stuff to it. I mean, just pick a high quality, ideally plain yogurt, and you add the toppings. That's going to be the healthiest yogurt for you. Or learn to, it's fun to make this stuff too. If you have the bandwidth for it, like you can make your own yogurts, you can make many of these different things at home. And that way you're not always buying everything off the shelf.
Yeah. And you could ferment a bunch of different stuff, make yogurts out of, same thing with kefir. There's like coconut kefir.
Yep.
So many ways to go about it.
Almond milk. You can make almond milk yogurt. There are many different.
I love that also because it's something that you could, throw into a smoothie or, get creative, make your little parfaits and things like that.
Yeah.
So I love that. And also, the reason I'm asking this too is that when we get into the fermented veggie side, it's checking off more boxes. Now we got the fiber as well
too.
Coming along.
I'm not kidding. You can literally take like broccoli or, okra, add a little bit of vinegar, add a little bit of olive oil, put your favorite salt on it, let it sit for at least 24 hours. That's fermented. It doesn't have to be hard, Yeah.
I was just hanging out with my wife and, some people love sushi out here. It's like people are obsessed.
Yeah.
All right.
Sushi's kind of good.
And now with that said, people love it so much, they'll just get it any random place. And I can't even, I just can't, I can't understand it.
Yeah.
So anyways, we're having some tempura, right? And there's kimchi that came along with it.
Right.
Super nice place, all sourced well, all the
Right.
things. And I got an experience, which I've had before, but just like this is where it comes in at. You have a little bit of the kimchi with this meal along, even with the bite,
Right.
right? It adds this new dynamic to
Yeah.
it. Because previously, once I found out, 15, 20 years ago about some of these benefits, I was just like raw dog and kimchi, just like taking it straight, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not always easy for people to get
Right.
invited into,
Right.
So that's why I was asking about how people can incorporate. And
Yeah.
also same with sauerkraut. There's a bunch of traditional dishes that you don't just eat sauerkraut out the jar, which I can actually easily do now. I kind of like it. But adding it with other meals.
Totally. And mixing things up a little bit. I mean, again, I think we think about food, unfortunately, or some of these things as prescriptive, but I would say just have fun with it. Like what can you make? Like get in the kitchen and kind of have fun, playing with these textures and flavors. All of them made sense. I was thinking about sushi. Think about sushi. They usually serve sushi with that fermented ginger. And there's a reason for that, right? And that's another one we didn't talk about. That's an easy one too, just fermenting ginger. But ginger does a couple of different things. It helps with digestion. It provides digestive enzymes. It's actually one of those bile acid binders too, helping to move something like raw fish move through your belly, right? And then when it's fermented, you're getting some bacteria from that as well. So
Checking again, our
Checking
ancestors
off all the
figured out
boxes.
little
Yep.
protection along
Yep.
with things as well. So we've got, if you're looking for what are some foods that we've got some science on that can support GLP-1, avocado, asparagus, fermented foods. I'm going to throw one more in here for everybody. And this is one of the coolest studies I've ever seen, actually. This was published in the Journal of Research in Medical Sciences, and they put participants on a matching calorie diet for 3 months. All right. But there's one big difference. One group included in their diet almonds, while the other group did not. And after the data was compiled at the end of the study, the folks who included almonds in their diet, listen to this, lost twice as much weight and had a greater reduction in their hip to waist ratio than those in the almond-free group. Now listen to this. The researchers found a greater improvement in insulin sensitivity and in the satiety hormone GLP-1 in the almond group.
Shocking.
How cool is that?
So neat.
So amazing. Again, the same, like this is what you was talking about earlier, again,
Right.
that the calories in, calorie out paradigm. Yes, it's a thing that exists, but what are your hormones doing?
Right.
How is your body relating with this
Quality,
stuff?
right? Again, quality. Like every meal is an opportunity to bring some of these high quality foods in. And maybe that's the challenge. Like, how can you make what you eat higher quality and just leveling up a little bit?
I love that. So one of the things that you're talking about now, again, the paradigm has shifted so fast with GLP-1 medications and, just hanging out, watching a basketball game with my son, I'm seeing drug ads
commercials,
for
I
it. Just
know.
like it's crazy and it happens so fast.
Yeah.
And there is obviously you being a holistic physician, you're looking at all the tools in the toolkit
Right.
and not eschewing medications and also not looking to this as the first line of treatment for patients.
Right.
And so something that you've been talking about is microdosing of GLP-1s. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I would love to. So, again, the challenge with the GLP-1 medications for not just our patients, but for many people that I talk to is that they did see results. They saw the results. But once that medication stopped, all that weight came right back. Yeah. And remember, the motivation to start a GLP-1 medication is not just weight, even though that's the one we're all fixated on, right? Because it's the one that's the most obvious or tangible. But when we're talking about metabolic health and really resetting metabolic health, we're talking about visceral fat, belly fat, cardiovascular health, and there's an element too that's involved in cognitive health and brain health as well. So, and then of course, blood sugar and diabetes. So we're talking about all of that. We're not just talking about weight. So conventionally, at regular dosing of our current family of GLP-1 medications, because there are about 4 or 5 on the market now. There are many different ones and they do different things. So conventional dosing, is set at certain levels, and the intention is that you go up every 4 weeks or every 8 weeks to the next level. And the expectation is that over the course of 4 to 5 months, sometimes up to 6 months, you'll lose weight at these conventional levels, and metabolic markers would shift as well. So all of that is incredible in theory if it was just a 6-month journey. But what has truly played out is that in the time that people are on conventional, and by conventional, I mean the regular standard dosing of this particular family of medications, is that there were a lot of side effects. There was everything from mild side effects, like I've got reflux or my stomach hurts or I'm constipated, to more severe side effects where I'm having anxiety, I'm having heart palpitations, I can't sleep at night, to disruption, quite honestly, in all the other hormone levels, So, it has multiple ramifications. And then now there are more studies like kind of linking GLP-1 medications to thyroid cancer and stuff like that. So we're seeing stuff come out, right? It's new, it's starting to come out. We're not going to know the full sort of scope of what standard dosing of GLP-1 medications does. Here's where, I've landed in this conversation, right? I too was very wary as a holistic and integrative physician of this medication. I was like, fundamentally, if we're trying to change metabolic health, it never happens quickly. And anytime we go for the short win, it is usually just that. It's a short win, and all that weight comes right back, and you're usually back at square one. And so I'm watching and I'm listening to all of this stuff, and I'm, also watching my patients struggle, right? So you've got people from all walks of life at all different ages and stages, whether they're, postpartum or they are in perimenopause or menopause, or you have men experiencing andropause, you name it, like really trying hard with this diet and exercise and movement and trying to manage all the variables of their health. And as we know, it's not easy to make change, right? It's very, very hard to institute all the changes that need to happen. It doesn't happen overnight. But what I found were that many people, when we talked about this is how you eat, this is how you move, these might be the herbs or supplements to take to support your natural GLP-1 production and to help us move these metabolic markers, would not see changes for 6 months, 9 months, sometimes up to a year. And while that sounds frustrating, even the medication is not really giving us changes for 4 to 6 months. And so if you're telling somebody that they've got a 1 year or 2 year or 3 year journey to get to their point of success, that's really demotivating.
Yeah.
Really demotivating. And so for me, as I'm watching and listening and hearing everyone's stories, looking at their numbers and trying to figure out what can I do to help, that's where this idea of microdosing came. And I'd been seeing a few people talk about it, or talk to our pharmacist. We, work with some compounding pharmacies, and they mentioned it. And I very hesitantly, I have to be honest, very hesitantly started prescribing it for our patients. And it was a game changer. And it was a game changer in the sense that there was not sudden weight loss and there was not massive weight loss. But what patients described was was this very gradual dialing down of inflammatory symptoms they were experiencing, whether it was water retention or a puffy face or joint pain. They were also noticing that they could regulate themselves a little bit better. They were still hungry. And that was the game changer, right? Between a conventional dosing and microdosing. Everyone is still hungry on a microdose, but not hungry to the point of no return. Not hungry to where, oh my gosh, I overate and now I can't backtrack from that. And they were not having the GI side effects. We were not seeing the constipation and the reflux and some of these things that people have been complaining about when they go on these medications. So for me, first patient does okay, second patient does okay. Okay, I'm going to try this a little bit more, and then I'm going to go dig into, what's happening out there in the community. First of all, there's not a ton of research around microdosing. The majority of research, if we're going to use research as the sword that we're going to fall on, is around conventional dosing. But I've always pushed back on that because I feel like the exam room really tells the true story. So what we're seeing in the exam room is that A1C levels, or the average of somebody's blood sugar over 3 months, were going down. Cholesterol levels were going down. Again, their appetite in general and their inflammatory responses was also going down. And so we set out to continue to watch those numbers and see how people felt. And it was fascinating, the difference between people on standard dosing and the difference in people on microdosing. The folks that were microdosing were able to come back to me and say, I want to space this out more. Instead of taking this shot every week, which is how it's traditionally prescribed, I'd like to go 10 days or 14 days, or maybe even just do it once a month. And I'm like, fine, let's give it a try, see what happens. And they got to where they could recognize, oh my gosh, my cues are off. Remember, hunger, satiety, feeling okay, versus ravenous all the time and thinking about food all the time. And by the way, that's real. That food noise and thinking about food and avoiding food and trying to deal with food, that's a very real issue for folks. But for the people that were being microdosed, they were better able to control that on-off switch than the folks that were on conventional dosing. The folks on conventional dosing were all in or all out. There was no in between. And that's very much how conventional medicine kind of works, right? It's the hammer or it's nothing, And so what we found that folks that were doing the conventional or the standard dosing, they can't come off. The minute they start to come off, the weight starts to pile back on. And they actually start to have this very emotional response to that, right? It was, oh my gosh, it's all going to come back. It's all going to start back over again. So they're much harder to take off this medication. Whereas with microdosing, you're working with a holistic metabolic plan, right? You're working with all the determinants of metabolic health, which are gut health, hormone health, mental health, cortisol and stress management, environmental health, and toxicity, right? We can work with all those determinants. And the folks that are conventional dosing, first of all, they're losing weight rapidly. Even though they say 4 to 6 months, many of them are losing it very quickly. So they're demotivated in a different way. They're not motivated to look at all the other determinants of health, right? They think, why? Why?
And their physicians generally, unfortunately, they're not educated on those
They're
things.
not educated. And so this is reinforced. But then they're kind of married to that medication for a long period of time.
That's a strong
So now
word, yeah.
What are we doing? What are we doing to the gut? What are we doing to the hormones? What's happening? Once you get to there's a healthy weight, right? So if you're obese and a conventional GLP-1 got you to a healthy weight, that's a win, right? But after that, what? You got there. Now what? Are we going to think about all the other determinants of health? Are we going to look at that? Oftentimes the answer is no. When you microdose, you're forced to have that conversation. You're forced to really look at that and then kind of in your head be like, I'm not on this forever. The other difference between the two is something we haven't talked about, which is really important to talk about, is your metabolic set point, right? With any diet, whether we're talking about GLP-1s or we're talking about something else, all of us have a metabolic set point. When we start to calorie restrict significantly, which is what happens with conventional dosing, we are lowering over time that metabolic set point. So yes, we lose weight, but then we also train the gut brain and the rest of our body and metabolic hormones that this is all we need to survive and eat. So the minute we go above that metabolic set point a little bit, we start to gain the weight back. With slower, more deliberate weight loss, when you're managing all the determinants of health, you're lowering that metabolic set point very gradually. So there's not this rebound phenomenon, right? The minute you go off this medication. So, I've gone from, this is scary, I don't like these medications, I don't want to prescribe these medications, I want nothing to do with them, to like, wait a minute. If we microdose, we're actually seeing some benefits. And here's what microdosing has done to me as a clinician and as a practitioner. We need to be microdosing all medications. We need to be adopting this mentality, whether it's cholesterol medication, blood pressure medication, and antidepressants and anxiety medication. We shouldn't be bringing sledgehammers in and shutting things down and then looking at a research study and saying, well, the research said blah, 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 blah. The research is a singular view on your health, which is multiple determinants and multi-focused and multifactorial. So to really adopt a true science-based approach to health, whether it's metabolic health, hormone health, children's health, whatever you and I end up talking about, there's a place for medications and pharmaceuticals. But I think that place is in microdosing and thinking through smaller doses and altered dose schedules rather than constantly bombarding everybody with these heavy-handed doses that they become very dependent on, and almost in a way disempowering the human body from healing and doing the work that it needs to do. Because the other thing I can vouch for is that we're actually like self-healing, self-rebooting machines when things are happening in the right direction. But the sledgehammer approach doesn't allow that healing journey to take place. So, long answer to I like microdosing, and yes, I'll microdose patients. And choosing the medication and the GLP-1 is dependent on the circumstances that we're dealing with. There's some that are better for people that are just struggling with blood sugar management. There's some that are better for cardiovascular health and those determinants of metabolic health, and some that are fine for just pure weight loss. But it comes into the picture when we want to think holistically after we've at least tried to tackle diet, exercise, cortisol, toxic load, hormone balance. What's next? If you're not seeing changes in results, what's next might be a microdose GLP-1.
Yeah. This just seems much more logical, much more sustainable. And, we do have a culture. We've got to understand the mindset of our culture, which is
fix me now.
We've believed in this magic pill.
I know.
We
got to change. That's what's driving up healthcare costs. That's what's creating the disease burden. I get it. I understand. I'm very empathetic to that. We all want the quick fix, but we have to somewhere along the way embrace this journey and understand that it's bigger than that, and just enter wherever you're ready. You might be only ready to have a conversation around food, or you might be ready to really look at your hormones, right? Or you may be like, okay, I'm going to focus on sleep. It doesn't matter. Just enter the chat, please, because your body's kind of begging you to, and the pharmaceuticals are there as a guide and maybe as an aid and maybe something to push things along a little bit faster than just trying to go it alone. Like I meet so many patients, right? Like my patients are like all natural, not doing any medication, coming off my thyroid, coming off everything. And then they flounder, right? So that's not right either, So let's bring it all together, and have a well thought out strategic approach, a strategic plan for you, just like you would for your business or your family or for anybody else. But you need one for you, and just decide what you're going to start first and understand that GLP-1s may have a role if you're dealing with metabolic health and you're frustrated and struggling. But I would vote for the microdosed role because then we can onload and offload as we want to without sort of this side effect up and down and weight coming back and everything going haywire.
Yeah. One of the most powerful, you said a lot of powerful things, but one of the most powerful is a strategic plan for yourself.
Yes.
So working with a practitioner who's actually paying attention to you.
Yeah.
And what a concept. And also understanding that, your needs are going to change over time as well. And being able to pick up tools and get yourself educated along the way. And also understanding catering things for you, it's going to involve all these other pieces that you've talked about. Whereas we also have a paradigm where this is becoming standard of care, including for children. Coming in, blunt instrument, hit your system, not accounting for all these other lifestyle factors, wondering why we have all of this chaos and also the long-term dependency. And there are ways to utilize, we have so many tools at our disposal today, but we're we're allowing ourselves to be treated like we're all one and the same, like we're just coming off the factory line. And so there isn't a magic pill, but there is a magic process. And
I love that. I might steal that from you. I love that.
That's going to incorporate the factors that you need for you right now, the foods that you need, the movement that you need, the sleep that you need, the relationships you need. We are dynamic. We have all these things about us. And if we're not paying attention to these and then trying to just force things with this blunt instrument, chances are it's not going to end well. And we've got to wake up to that and also get ourselves educated. You've got so much incredible education available for people.
Yeah.
Your most recent book, The Hormone Shift, is out there. It's a must-have. You can pick that up anywhere books are sold. And also, where can people follow you, get more information? You just started a show.
I did start a show.
Let's talk about that.
Definitely. Well, the show is Whole Plus, and it's all about bringing all the different determinants of health together, bringing Eastern medicine and Western medicine together, bringing holistic, integrative, and functional medicine together, and even bringing in the wellness community as well. And, I've spent a lot of time in the space, and I've watched everybody divide up again, right? And what I really want to do is bring it all back together. That's why it's called Whole Plus, where we're holistic, but we're really looking at all of it. We're not like this conversation right here. We're not opposed to writing a prescription or thinking about the right preventive screens and really adhering to kind of what we learned in med school and through our educational systems, right? So the show is Whole Plus, and we have amazing guests talking about many of the different determinants of health. We're talking a lot about the science of health and wellness and medicine, but also about the human spirit, because the two are connected. I very much believe in the 5 bodies, where we have multiple layers to ourselves that are involved in a healing journey. So we're going to be bringing guests in that can address all of that. But it's not just about the show. We are launching a digital platform that will be live in the next month or two, where it is full of resources. You can take one of our assessments and really learn how to begin this holistic journey, what your starting point might need to be. You'll be able to join a holistic health community at a nominal fee, where we'll be teaching and lecturing on a weekly basis. You'll learn from others and be able to exchange ideas and information, what worked for you. I have this, that type of thing. My provider team that's been running our clinics over the last, 15 years or so will be joining me in that and partaking in giving some of that advice and counsel. And then, of course, we have our whole, place of resources and guides and all the different things that we know over time have worked patient after patient. We've probably collectively seen about 60,000 patients across our locations. So we know that a lot of what we're talking about works. We've done it. We've done the hard work. So my hope with Whole Plus is that it's an on-ramp for everybody to start having these conversations with themselves and then come into our digital platform. Maybe that's their first step, and really start that learning and healing journey. And then if you do want to be a patient, that'll be an option as well. We have a telehealth platform, and then we have 4 clinic locations across the country. So really excited about seeing all of this come alive, and more importantly, seeing it come together so that no matter where you are, whether you just want to read an article or you want to watch a YouTube video, or you're ready to kind of learn a little bit more about yourself, or you're ready to be a patient, you have an option.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
Like what supplements will help: ashwagandha, rhodiola, magnesium, zinc, using chromium a little bit for insulin levels, blood sugar, mulberry, citrus, and guarana for fat burning, just to help a little bit here and there. So I just started playing with everything.